When a desperate mother of 5 points a gun at a stranger's chest, she expects to walk away with his money. But Ezra Morrison offers something far more valuable than gold. In a world where a woman's worth is measured by the name she carries, will Martha discover that sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't taking what you need, but accepting what you never dared to hope for? A gun clicks in the dusty morning air of Arizona Territory, 1867, and everything is about to change forever. Martha Kellerman pressed her back against the rough wall, feeling every bump and crack through her thin dress. The sun had barely peeked over the mountains, but already the heat made her skin sticky with sweat. In her right hand, she gripped her dead husband's old gun so tight her knuckles turned white as bone. Behind a wooden water barrel, her 5 children huddled together like scared rabbits. 3-year-old Lily sucked her thumb, her big brown eyes wide with fear. 6-year-old Benjamin tried to look brave, but his bottom lip kept shaking. 8-year-old Clara held baby Michael close to her chest, rocking him gently so he wouldn't cry. 10-year-old Emma, the oldest girl, watched her mother with worried eyes that seemed too old for her young face. Martha's stomach growled loud enough that she worried the whole town might hear it. 3 days, 3 whole days since any of them had eaten a real meal. Yesterday, they'd shared one hard biscuit and some water from the well. Today, there wasn't even that much left. The landlord, Mr. Garrison, had been clear as mountain water when he'd knocked on their door last evening. 2 months' rent by sundown tomorrow, Mrs. Kellerman, or you and those children will be sleeping under the stars. His cold eyes had looked right through her, like she was already a ghost. Martha had counted the coins in her small cloth bag 17 times after he left. 43 cents. Not even close to the $12 she owed. Not close to buying food either. She'd sat up all night, listening to her children's empty bellies rumble in the darkness, trying to think of any other way out of this terrible mess. But there was no other way. Not for a woman alone with 5 hungry mouths to feed. The sound of horse hooves on the dusty main street made her heart jump like a scared cat. Through the gap between buildings, she could see a lone rider approaching. For 3 mornings now, she'd watched this same man ride into town. He always tied his horse right here, next to the general store. His saddlebags always looked heavy, full of whatever wealthy men carried when they had more money than they knew what to do with. Martha had never stolen anything in her whole life. Her mother had raised her to be honest and good, to work hard and trust in God's plan. But God's plan seemed to include watching her babies waste away from hunger, and Martha couldn't accept that anymore. The rider came closer, his horse's hooves making a steady clip-clop sound on the hard-packed dirt. Martha could see him clearly now. A man maybe a few years older than her own 28 years, with dark hair and clothes that weren't fancy but weren't patched and mended like hers either. His hat sat straight on his head, and he rode like someone who belonged wherever he went. Emma whispered from behind the barrel, "Mama, I'm scared." Martha turned to look at her oldest daughter, seeing her own fear reflected in those young eyes. "I know, sweetheart," she whispered back, "but sometimes grown-ups have to do scary things to protect their children." The rider was dismounting now, just 10 feet away from where Martha hid. She could hear his boots hit the ground with a solid thump. He moved like a man who'd never known real hunger, never stayed awake at night wondering how to feed his family the next day. Martha closed her eyes and said a quick prayer, not for forgiveness, because she couldn't ask God to forgive something she wasn't sorry for doing. Instead, she prayed for courage. Courage to do what needed doing. Courage to be strong for her children. Courage to face whatever came after. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the dusty street. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed, and the smell of bacon cooking drifted from the boarding house down the street. Martha's mouth watered so badly she had to swallow hard to keep from crying. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything. She stepped out from behind the wall, raised the gun with both hands to keep it steady, and took the deepest breath of her life. "Stop right there and don't you dare move another muscle." Martha's voice came out stronger than she'd expected, cutting through the morning quiet like a knife. The gun felt heavy as a rock in her shaking hands, but she kept it pointed straight at the man's broad back. He froze immediately, his hands moving slowly away from his body. When he turned around, Martha got her first real look at his face. He had kind eyes, the color of storm clouds before rain. and weathered skin that spoke of long days working under the sun. A thin scar ran from his left ear to his jaw, but somehow it didn't make him look mean. If anything, it made him look sad. "Ma'am," he said, his voice as gentle as summer wind through wheat. "My name is Ezra Morrison. Are you hurt? Do you need help?" The question hit Martha like a slap across the face. Here she stood, pointing a gun at his chest, threatening to rob him blind, and he was asking if she needed help. Her hands started shaking worse, and she had to grip the gun even tighter to keep it steady. "I need your money," she said, trying to sound tough and dangerous. "All of it. Right now." Ezra's eyes moved past her shoulder, and Martha knew with a sinking feeling that he'd spotted her children hiding behind the water barrel. When he looked back at her, something had changed in his face. Not fear. She'd expected fear. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like understanding. "How long has it been?" he asked quietly. "How long has what been?" Martha snapped, though she already knew what he meant. "Since they've eaten. Since any of you have had a proper meal." Behind her, she heard little Lily start to whimper. The sound cut through Martha's heart like a dull blade. She wanted to turn around and comfort her baby girl, but she couldn't take her eyes off this strange man who seemed to see right through her fierce act to the desperate mother underneath. "That's none of your business," Martha said, but her voice cracked on the words. Ezra nodded slowly, like her non-answer had told him everything he needed to know. "I lost my wife 2 years back," he said, speaking as calmly as if they were having tea instead of a robbery. "She died trying to give me a son. Lost the baby too. I know what it feels like when the whole world seems set on taking everything that matters to you." Martha felt hot tears burning behind her eyes, but she blinked them back hard. She couldn't afford to cry. Not now. Not when her children's lives depended on her being strong. "I don't care about your sad story," she lied. "I just want your money." "I believe you do care," Ezra said gently, "and I believe you're a good woman who's run out of choices. Am I right?" From behind the barrel, 10-year-old Emma's voice piped up, thin as spider silk. "We haven't eaten in 3 days, mister. Mama's trying to take care of us, but there ain't no work for ladies in this town." "Emma!" Martha hissed, mortified that her daughter had spoken up. But when she looked back at Ezra, she saw something new in his eyes. Not pity. She couldn't have stood pity. Something warmer. Something that looked almost like respect. 3 days, he repeated, shaking his head slowly. "And what happens if you don't get some money today?" "The landlord throws us out," Martha admitted, the words bitter as burnt coffee in her mouth. "We'll have nowhere to go. Nothing to eat. My babies will." She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't even think about what might happen to her children if she failed them now. Ezra was quiet for a long moment, studying her face like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Then, moving very slowly so he wouldn't startle her, he reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. Martha could hear coins jingling inside. More money than she'd seen in months. He set the pouch gently on the ground between them, then stepped back with his hands raised. "There's enough there to pay your rent and buy food for a month," he said. "Maybe more. Take it." Martha stared at the pouch, hardly believing what she was seeing. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I can," Ezra said simply. "And because you shouldn't have to point a gun at strangers to feed your children." The gun wavered in Martha's grip. This wasn't how robberies were supposed to go. The man was supposed to be scared, angry, desperate to get away. He wasn't supposed to be kind. He wasn't supposed to understand. He wasn't supposed to make her feel like maybe, just maybe, there were still good people left in this hard world. "I can't just take your money," she heard herself say. "Why not?" Because that would make me a thief." Ezra smiled then, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Ma'am, I don't think anything in this world could make you a thief. Desperate, maybe. Scared for your children, absolutely. But not a thief." Behind her, baby Michael started to cry. A thin, hungry wail that tore at Martha's heart. Clara made soft, shushing sounds, trying to comfort him. But Martha knew what he needed. What they all needed. "There is another way," Ezra said suddenly, like he'd just thought of something important. "Instead of you taking my money and me riding on, what if we helped each other?" Martha lowered the gun slightly, curiosity overcoming her desperation. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Mrs. Kellerman." Martha, Kellerman. I mean, Mrs. Kellerman, what if instead of this being the end of our acquaintance, it was just the beginning? 3 weeks later, Martha's world had turned completely upside down, and she still couldn't believe it was real. She stood in the biggest kitchen she'd ever seen, her hands covered in flour, as she kneaded bread dough on a wooden table that could seat 8 people. Through the window, she watched her children running around the yard of Ezra Morrison's ranch, their faces bright with sunshine and full bellies. For the first time in months, they looked like regular kids instead of scared, hungry shadows. The deal Ezra had offered that dusty morning seemed impossible at first. He needed someone to cook, clean, and help manage his small cattle ranch. She needed a place for her family to live and steady work to keep them fed. It was practical, sensible, and completely proper. She had her own room, the children shared 2 others, and Ezra slept in the barn loft to make sure no one could question the arrangement. But Martha was starting to realize that what felt practical during the day became something else entirely in the quiet evening hours when they sat on the porch after the children were asleep. "Mama!" Emma burst through the back door, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mr. Morrison says he's going to teach Benjamin how to ride Thunder tomorrow. Can you believe it?" Martha smiled, wiping her floury hands on her apron. Thunder was Ezra's gentlest horse, a big brown mare with kind eyes who followed the children around like a patient dog. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart, but you make sure Benjamin listens to every word Mr. Morrison says, you hear?" "I will, Mama." "Oh, and he says to tell you that Mrs. Patterson from town stopped by while you were hanging laundry. She left something for you on the front porch." Martha's heart skipped a beat. Mrs. Patterson was the preacher's wife, one of the most respected ladies in Tucson. If she'd come calling, it could mean only one thing. Word was spreading about the Kellerman family living at the Morrison Ranch. Martha dusted the flour from her hands and walked through the house to the front porch, her stomach tight with worry. Sure enough, a small wicker basket sat beside the door, covered with a checkered cloth. Tucked under the handle was a folded piece of paper with her name written in careful script. She opened the note with trembling fingers. "Dear Mrs. Kellerman, I hope you and your children are settling in well at Mr. Morrison's ranch. Please accept these preserves as a welcome gift. I do hope we might have occasion to speak soon about certain matters of concern to the community. Most sincerely, Mrs. Eleanor Patterson." Martha's blood ran cold. Matters of concern to the community. She knew exactly what that meant. The good people of Tucson were starting to talk about the improper arrangement at the Morrison Ranch. A widower and a widow living under the same roof, no matter how innocent the situation actually was. Bad news? Martha jumped, spinning around to find Ezra standing at the corner of the house. His hat was pushed back on his head, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up from whatever work he'd been doing. Even after 3 weeks, the sight of him still made something flutter in her chest. Something she had no business feeling. "Mrs. Patterson came by," Martha said, holding up the note. "I think we might have a problem." Ezra read the note over her shoulder, close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and sunshine that seemed to follow him everywhere. When he finished reading, he was quiet for a long moment. "I was wondering when this would start," he said finally. "You knew people would talk? I hoped they wouldn't, but I'm not surprised they are." He leaned against the porch railing, studying the horizon where the sun was starting to sink toward the mountains. "The question is, what do we do about it?" Martha felt panic rising in her throat like floodwater. "We? There's no we about it. This is my fault. I should take the children and leave before I ruin your reputation completely." "Where would you go?" The simple question stopped Martha cold. Where would she go? She had no family left, no friends with room for 5 extra mouths to feed. The little bit of money she'd managed to save from her wages wouldn't last a week if she had to pay for food and lodging on her own. I don't know," she admitted, "but I can't stay here and let people think terrible things about you. You've been nothing but kind to us. You don't deserve to have your good name dragged through the mud because of me." Ezra turned to look at her then, and something in his gray eyes made her breath catch. "What if my good name isn't as important to me as making sure you and those children are safe and fed?" Before Martha could answer, the sound of galloping horses cut through the evening air. Both of them turned to see 3 riders approaching fast, dust clouds billowing behind them. Even at a distance, Martha recognized the tall, thin figure of Sheriff Hawkins leading the group. "Get the children inside," Ezra said quietly, his voice calm but firm. "Now." Martha's heart started pounding like a drum. "What do you think they want?" "Nothing good, I'd guess. Go on. Get them inside and keep them there until I come get you." Martha ran toward the backyard, calling for her children to come in for supper. Emma gave her a curious look. It was still too early for supper, but she helped herd the younger ones toward the house without asking questions. From the kitchen window, Martha watched the three men dismount in the front yard. Besides Sheriff Hawkins, she recognized Mr. WWW. Garrison, her old landlord, and a third man she didn't know, someone with a hard face and expensive clothes who looked like he'd never done an honest day's work in his life. "Stay here," she told the children. "All of you. Don't come out no matter what you hear, understand?" "But, Mama," Benjamin started. "No buts. You watch your sisters and brother, and you stay put." Martha crept through the house until she could hear the conversation on the front porch. She pressed herself against the wall beside the window, her heart hammering so hard she was sure everyone in Arizona Territory could hear it. "Living arrangement is completely inappropriate," the unknown man was saying in a voice like grinding gravel. "A decent community can't allow such moral corruption to flourish." "Mr. Kellerman," Ezra's voice was steady and polite, "I'm not sure what concern my household arrangements are of yours." "It's Mr. Blackwood," the man corrected. "And it's my concern because I represent the interests of decent, God-fearing families in this territory. When a man harbors a woman of questionable virtue and her illegitimate offspring..." "Stop right there." Ezra's voice had gone cold as winter wind. "You'll keep a civil tongue when speaking about Mrs. Kellerman and her children, or you'll remove yourself from my property." Sheriff Hawkins cleared his throat nervously. "Now, Ezra, nobody's looking to cause trouble, but you have to understand how this looks to folks in town." "How it looks," Ezra repeated slowly. "Or how it is." "Well, I mean, you got an unmarried woman living in your house. People are bound to talk." Martha closed her eyes, feeling shame wash over her like dirty water. This was exactly what she'd feared would happen. She'd brought scandal and trouble to the one man who'd shown her genuine kindness. "Let me ask you something, Sheriff," Ezra said. "When Mrs. Kellerman was about to be evicted with 5 hungry children, where were all these concerned citizens then? When she was 3 days without food, trying to figure out how to keep her babies alive, where was this Christian charity I keep hearing about?" "That's not the point," Mr. Blackwood started. "That's exactly the point. You all stood by and watched a war widow struggle to survive. But now you're concerned about propriety? Now you care about what's right and wrong?" Through the window, Martha could see Ezra facing down the 3 men, his shoulders squared and his jaw set with determination. Something warm and fierce bloomed in her chest, something that felt dangerously like admiration, maybe even something deeper. "The law is clear about cohabitation between unmarried persons," Mr. Blackwood said smugly. "I have the authority to remove those children from this immoral environment." Martha's blood turned to ice water. Remove her children? Take them away from her? "On what grounds?" Ezra demanded. "On the grounds that their mother has shown herself to be a person of low moral character by entering into an improper living arrangement with a man who is not her husband." "And if that living arrangement were to change?" Ezra asked quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Martha held her breath, afraid to move, afraid to think about what he might mean. "What are you suggesting, Morrison?" Sheriff Hawkins asked. Martha pressed closer to the window, straining to hear Ezra's answer. Whatever he said next, she had the feeling it would change everything forever. "I'm suggesting that maybe it's time for a wedding." Ezra's words hit Martha like lightning on a clear day, making her knees go weak and her heart stop completely. Through the crack in the curtain, she watched him face down 3 men who had the power to destroy her life. And he was talking about marriage like it was the most natural thing in the world. "A wedding?" Mr. Blackwood's voice rose with surprise. "You mean to tell me you'd actually marry this woman?" Martha felt her cheeks burn with anger and humiliation. This woman, like she was something dirty they'd found on the bottom of their boots. But before she could even form the words to defend herself, Ezra's voice cut through the air like a sharp blade. "Her name is Martha Kellerman, and she's worth more than the 3 of you put together. She's kept 5 children alive through circumstances that would have broken weaker people. She works harder than any 2 men I know. And yes, Mr. Blackwood, I'd be honored to marry her if she'll have me. The silence that followed was so complete Martha could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Behind her, she sensed movement and turned to find all 5 of her children crowded in the doorway, their eyes wide with shock and hope and fear, all mixed together. Did he just say he wants to marry Mama? 6-year-old Benjamin whispered. Emma, always the most practical of her siblings, hushed him with a finger to her lips. But Martha could see the same question burning in all their young faces. Sheriff Hawkins cleared his throat. Well, that would certainly change things from a legal standpoint. But Ezra, you sure you want to rush into something like this? Marriage is a big step, especially with 5 children involved. There's nothing rushed about it, Ezra replied firmly. I've had 3 weeks to see what kind of woman Martha is, what kind of mother she is. I've watched her turn a house into a home, seen how she loves those children, witnessed her work ethic and her character. If anything, I should have asked her sooner. Martha's heart was beating so fast she thought it might fly right out of her chest. Through the window she could see Mr. Blackwood's face turning red with frustration. This is highly irregular, he sputtered. You can't just decide to get married to avoid a scandal. Who says I'm avoiding anything? Ezra stepped closer to the man, and Martha noticed how Mr. Blackwood took an involuntary step backward. Maybe I'm just a man who's smart enough to recognize a good woman when he finds one. Martha turned away from the window, pressing her back against the wall and trying to catch her breath. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to women like her. Poor widows with too many children and not enough money. Men like Ezra Morrison didn't propose marriage to desperate women who'd pointed guns at them 3 weeks ago. But even as she tried to convince herself it wasn't real, another part of her heart was soaring like a bird set free from its cage. Mama. Emma appeared at her side, speaking so softly only Martha could hear. Are you going to say yes? Martha looked down at her oldest daughter, seeing wisdom in those young eyes that no 12-year-old should have to carry. I don't know, sweetheart. It's complicated. What's complicated about it? This from 10-year-old Clara, who'd crept closer to join the whispered conversation. He's nice to us. He makes sure we have enough food. He doesn't yell or drink whiskey or hit anybody. And he's teaching me to ride thunder, Benjamin added helpfully. And he reads us stories sometimes. Little Lily chimed in, not really understanding what they were talking about, but not wanting to be left out. Martha felt tears stinging her eyes. Her children had been through so much, lost so much. Their father had been a good man, but he'd been gone for over a year now, and they'd struggled so hard just to survive. The idea that they might have a chance at a real family again, a real home. But what if he's only asking because of those men out there? Martha whispered. What if he feels like he has to marry me to protect us, but he doesn't really want to? Emma considered this with the seriousness of a judge. Mama, remember what Daddy used to say about people's actions speaking louder than their words? Martha nodded, remembering her late husband's practical wisdom. Well, Mr. Morrison's actions have been saying he cares about us for 3 whole weeks now. Every day, he makes sure we have what we need. Every evening, he sits with us on the porch and listens to us talk about our day. He fixed Benjamin's broken toy horse. He helped me with my sums when I was struggling. He braided Lily's hair when you were busy with the washing. The sound of voices rising outside interrupted Emma's speech. Through the window, Martha could see that the conversation was getting more heated. You have no legal standing to interfere with Mr. Morrison's household, Sheriff Hawkins was saying to Mr. Blackwood. If he wants to marry Mrs. Kellerman, that's his right as a free citizen. The community has standards, Mr. Blackwood began. The community has hypocrites, Ezra cut him off. Men who talk about Christian duty on Sunday and ignore starving children on Monday. If you want to question somebody's moral character, maybe you should start with the people who watched a war widow go hungry, rather than offer a helping hand. Martha had heard enough. Her children were watching her with hope-filled eyes, waiting to see what their mother would do. Outside, a good man was defending her honor against people who'd never shown her a moment's kindness. And somewhere deep in her heart, she already knew what her answer would be. She walked to the front door and stepped out onto the porch, ignoring the surprised looks from the 3 visitors. Ezra's face lit up when he saw her, and she felt that familiar flutter in her chest that had been growing stronger every day for 3 weeks. Mr. Morrison, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the yard. "I believe you have a question to ask me." Ezra's smile was brighter than the Arizona sun. He stepped toward her, leaving the three men standing awkwardly by their horses. When he reached the porch steps, he climbed up until he was standing right in front of her, close enough that she could see the hope and nervousness warring in his gray eyes. "Martha Kellerman," he said, his voice gentle but strong enough for everyone to hear. "These past 3 weeks have been the happiest I've known in 2 years. You've brought life back to this house, laughter back to my days, and purpose back to my heart. I know this started as a business arrangement, but somewhere along the way, it became something more. At least it did for me." Martha felt tears spilling down her cheeks. But for once, they weren't tears of sadness or fear. "Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Ezra asked. "Will you let me be a father to your children and a husband to you, for real and forever?" Behind her, Martha could hear her children holding their breath. In front of her, Ezra waited with his heart in his eyes. Beyond him, 3 men watched with varying degrees of surprise, disapproval, and resignation. But none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was the man standing before her, offering her something she'd never dared to dream of. Not just security or respectability, but genuine affection and the chance for her children to grow up in a real family. "Yes," Martha said, her voice strong and clear as mountain air. "Yes, Ezra Morrison, I'll marry you." The cheer that erupted from inside the house was loud enough to startle the horses. Her children came tumbling out onto the porch, wrapping themselves around both Martha and Ezra in a tangle of arms and excited voices. "When's the wedding gonna be?" Benjamin wanted to know. "Can I wear Mama's good dress?" Clara asked. "Will we really get to be Morrisons?" Emma's question was quiet but urgent. Ezra looked over their heads at Martha, and she saw her own joy reflected in his eyes. "As soon as it can be arranged," he told the children. "And yes, you'll all be Morrisons, if that's what you want." "Yes," they chorused together, and Martha felt her heart grow so full she thought it might burst with happiness. From the yard, Sheriff Hawkins cleared his throat. "Well, I guess that settles that. Congratulations to you both." He tipped his hat and mounted his horse, clearly eager to be away from the uncomfortable scene. Mr. Blackwood, however, wasn't ready to give up. "This is highly irregular," he said again. "A marriage of convenience to avoid scandal." "Mr. Blackwood," Martha interrupted, stepping forward with her children surrounding her like a small army. "This is a marriage of love, respect, and mutual affection. If that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps you should examine why a happy family threatens you so much." The man's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Finally, he mounted his horse in stiff silence and rode away without another word. As the dust settled behind the departing riders, Martha looked around at her family, because that's what they were now, really and truly a family. The future stretched ahead of them, bright with possibilities she'd never imagined just 1 month ago. But first, they had a wedding to plan. Wedding bells were supposed to bring joy, but the angry shouts outside the church made Martha's stomach twist into knots. 2 weeks after Ezra's proposal, Martha stood in the small back room of Tucson's only church, smoothing down her best dress for the 3rd time. Through the thin wooden walls, she could hear raised voices arguing in the main sanctuary. Her hands shook as she tried to pin a small wildflower in her hair, a wedding gift from Emma who'd picked it that morning. "Mama, you look beautiful," Emma said from behind her, but Martha could hear the worry in her daughter's voice. The door burst open without warning, making both of them jump. Ezra stepped inside, his face dark with anger and something that looked like fear. Behind him, Reverend Patterson wrung his hands nervously. "What's happening out there?" Martha asked, though part of her didn't want to know. "Mr. Blackwood came back," Ezra said grimly. "He brought half the town council with him, plus some federal marshal he claims has authority to stop the wedding." Martha's heart sank like a stone in deep water. "Stop it? On what grounds?" "They're saying I'm not fit to be a father to your children. Something about my past military service claims I'm mentally unstable from the war." Ezra ran his hand through his dark hair, messing up the neat style he'd worked so hard to achieve that morning. "It's all lies, but they've got official-looking papers." Through the walls, Martha could hear her other children crying. The sound cut through her like a knife. Benjamin was sobbing for his mama, while little Lily wailed in confusion. Clara and Michael's voices joined the chorus of distress. I have to go to them, Martha said, moving toward the door. Wait. Ezra caught her arm gently. There's something else. The marshal. He's not really here about my fitness as a father. Martha looked into his gray eyes and saw truth there that made her blood run cold. What do you mean? I mean, Mr. Blackwood has been asking questions about you too. About how we met. About that morning when I tried to rob you. Martha finished quietly. Ezra nodded. Someone saw us that day. Saw you with the gun. Blackwood's convinced the marshal that you're a dangerous criminal who shouldn't have custody of children. The room spun around Martha like she was caught in a dust devil. Everything was falling apart. The wedding, her children, her chance at happiness, all of it crumbling because of one desperate moment 3 weeks ago. Mrs. Kellerman, Reverend Patterson spoke up nervously. Perhaps we should postpone the ceremony until these matters can be sorted out properly. No. The word came out stronger than Martha felt. Absolutely not. Both men stared at her in surprise. No, she repeated, straightening her shoulders. I am not going to let bullies and liars destroy my family. Not today. Not ever. Martha, Ezra said gently, if we go through with this now, it might make things worse for the children. The children need to see that their mother doesn't back down when people try to hurt her family. Martha walked to the door, her hand steady on the handle. They need to know that love is worth fighting for, even when the whole world seems against you. She opened the door and stepped into the main sanctuary. The sight that greeted her made her jaw clench with determination. About 30 people filled the wooden pews, split into 2 clear groups. On one side sat the few friends they'd made. Mrs. Henderson from the general store, old Mr. Garcia, who ran the livery stable, and a handful of other folks who'd shown them kindness. On the other side, Mr. Blackwood held court with the marshal, several town council members, and various citizens whose faces showed everything from curiosity to outright disapproval. Her children sat in the front pew, Emma holding baby Michael while Clara and Benjamin pressed close to her sides. Lily had climbed into Benjamin's lap and was sucking her thumb, something she only did when she was truly frightened. There she is. Mr. Blackwood pointed at Martha like she was a criminal in a courtroom. The woman who threatened an innocent man with a deadly weapon. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Martha heard someone gasp. She held up Mr. Morrison, another voice whispered. With those children watching? The marshal, a tall man with cold blue eyes and a star pinned to his vest, stepped forward. Mrs. Kellerman, you're under arrest for armed robbery and endangering the welfare of minor children. Now wait just a minute, Ezra said, moving to stand beside Martha. There was no robbery. Nobody was hurt. This is all... Step aside, Mr. Morrison, the marshal ordered. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Martha looked at her children's terrified faces and felt something fierce and protective rise up in her chest like a flame. These people wanted to take her away from her babies, separate her family, destroy the only happiness they'd found in months. Well, they'd have to go through her first. You want to arrest me? Martha said, her voice carrying to every corner of the church. Fine. But first, you're going to hear the truth. All of it. She walked to the front of the church, ignoring the marshal's outstretched hand and the crowd's surprised murmurs. When she reached the altar where she was supposed to be married in 5 minutes, she turned to face everyone. My name is Martha Kellerman, she began, her voice clear and strong. I am the widow of Corporal James Kellerman, who died fighting for the Union Army at Gettysburg. I have 5 children who are everything to me. And yes, 3 weeks ago, I pointed a gun at Ezra Morrison. The crowd stirred restlessly. Some people looked shocked. Others nodded as if their suspicions had been confirmed. I did it because my children hadn't eaten in 3 days, Martha continued. Because we were about to be thrown out of our room with nowhere to go. Because I had watched my babies get thinner and weaker every day, and I was out of choices. That's no excuse for... Mr. Blackwood started. I'm not finished, Martha cut him off, and something in her tone made him close his mouth. I pointed that gun at Mr. Morrison, and you know what he did? He didn't get angry. He didn't call for help. He didn't try to hurt me or my children. Instead, he asked me how long it had been since we'd eaten. She looked directly at the marshal, then at Mr. Blackwood, then at each member of the town council. He offered me money, not because I was robbing him, but because he saw a family in need and chose to help. When I couldn't accept charity, he offered me honest work. He gave us a home, food, safety, and respect. And somewhere along the way, what started as a business arrangement became something real. Martha felt tears on her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. Let them see her cry. Let them see her heart. So yes, arrest me if you want. Take me away from my children. Break up my family. Destroy the best thing that's happened to us in months. But know this, every person in this room who stays silent while you do it is just as responsible as the man giving the orders. The church fell completely silent. Martha could hear the wind rustling through the cottonwood trees outside, could hear her own heart beating, could hear little Lily's sniffles from the front pew. Then Emma stood up. "My mama is the bravest person I know," she said, her 12-year-old voice trembling but determined. "She kept us alive when Daddy died. She worked her fingers raw trying to take care of us. She went 3 days without eating so we could have the last of the food. If pointing a gun at someone to save her children makes her a criminal, then I'm proud to be a criminal's daughter." One by one, her other children stood up too. Benjamin, wiping his nose on his sleeve. Clara, holding baby Michael tight. Even little Lily, not really understanding but following her siblings' lead. "We want to be Morrisons," Benjamin said in his 6-year-old voice. "Mr. Morrison makes Mama smile again." Mrs. Henderson stood up in the third pew. "I've known Martha Kellerman for 3 weeks," she said in her creaky old voice. "She's honest, hardworking, and devoted to those children. If you arrest her, you'll have to arrest me too, because I'd do the same thing for my grandchildren if I had to." Old Mr. Garcia rose next. "See, and me too. A parent who won't fight for their children, that's the real crime." More people began standing. Not all of them, but enough that Martha felt hope flickering in her chest like a candle flame. The marshal looked around the room, his cold eyes taking in the growing number of people willing to stand with Martha. His hand moved away from the handcuffs on his belt. "Mr. Blackwood," he said slowly, "maybe we should reconsider this situation." "There will be no reconsidering anything," a new voice boomed from the back of the church, and Martha's heart nearly stopped. Judge William Crawford stood in the doorway like an avenging angel, his black robes billowing and his stern face carved from granite. At 60 years old, he was the most powerful man in the territory, known for his harsh sentences and uncompromising view of the law. Martha had never seen him in person, but everyone knew his reputation. The marshal immediately straightened up, his hand moving back to his handcuffs. "Judge Crawford, sir, we were just about to arrest Mrs. Kellerman for armed robbery and child endangerment." "Were you now?" Judge Crawford walked slowly down the center aisle, his boots clicking on the wooden floor like a death march. Every person in the church turned to watch him, and the silence was so complete Martha could hear her own ragged breathing. When he reached the front of the church, the judge looked directly at Martha with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "Mrs. Kellerman," he said in a voice like rolling thunder, "is it true that you threatened Mr. Morrison with a firearm?" Martha lifted her chin, even though her knees felt like water. "Yes, sir, it's true." "And is it true that your children were present during this incident?" "Yes, sir." Judge Crawford nodded slowly, then turned to face the entire congregation. "And, Mr. Morrison, is it true that you wish to marry this woman despite her criminal actions?" Ezra stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. "It is, Your Honor. More than anything in the world." "I see." The judge was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces of Martha's children in the front pew. Little Lily had stopped crying and was staring at him with wide, curious eyes. Benjamin had moved protectively in front of his sisters, trying to look braver than his 6 years. "Mr. Blackwood," Judge Crawford said suddenly, "approach the bench." There was no bench in the church, but Mr. Blackwood hurried forward anyway, looking nervous for the first time since Martha had met him. "You've been stirring up quite a fuss," the judge said quietly, but his voice carried to every corner of the church. "Making accusations, demanding arrests, disrupting a wedding ceremony. Tell me, what exactly is your interest in this case?" Mr. Blackwood puffed up like a toad. "Your Honor, I represent the moral interests of this community. We cannot allow criminals to roam freely among decent families." "Criminals?" Judge Crawford repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, let's talk about criminals. Tell me, Mr. Blackwood, what do you know about the legal definition of robbery?" "Well, it's taking someone's property by force or threat of force." "Indeed. And did Mrs. Kellerman take any property belonging to Mr. Morrison?" Mr. Blackwood's face began to redden. She would have, if he hadn't stopped her. But she didn't actually take anything? No, but... So, we have attempted robbery then. Except... The judge turned to Ezra. Mr. Morrison, did you feel threatened by Mrs. Kellerman's actions? No, Your Honor. I felt sorry for her. Did you fear for your safety or your property? No, sir. I could see she was desperate to feed her children. I understood why she was there. And did you wish to press charges against her at any time? Absolutely not. Judge Crawford turned back to Mr. Blackwood, and Martha could see sweat beading on the man's forehead despite the cool morning air. So, we have an alleged crime, where the supposed victim felt neither threatened nor harmed, where no property was actually taken, and where no charges were filed. Most interesting. The judge's voice was dry as desert sand. Tell me, Mr. Blackwood, what's your real reason for pursuing this matter? The community standards. Moral corruption. Ah, yes, moral corruption. Judge Crawford's eyes glittered dangerously. Would you consider it morally corrupt for a community to let a war widow and her children go hungry while the townspeople ignore their plight? That's not. We couldn't have known. Couldn't have known? The judge's voice rose slightly. Mrs. Kellerman, how long were you struggling before that morning when you approached Mr. Morrison? About 4 months, Your Honor, Martha replied quietly. 4 months. And in all that time, Mr. Blackwood, did you or any of your morally upright citizens offer assistance to this family? The silence in the church was deafening. I thought not, Judge Crawford said. So we have a community that ignores starving children, but rushes to condemn the mother who tries to save them. Most enlightening. He walked over to where Martha's children sat, his stern face softening as he looked down at them. Young lady, he said to Emma, what's your name? Emma Kellerman, sir, she replied, standing up straight. And what do you think of Mr. Morrison? Emma glanced at her mother, then back at the judge. He's kind to us, sir. He makes sure we have enough food, and he doesn't yell or get angry. He teaches Benjamin things, and he helps Mama with the heavy work. And he makes her smile, which she hadn't done much since Daddy died. Judge Crawford nodded thoughtfully, then looked at Benjamin. And you, son? What's your opinion? I like him, Benjamin said simply. He said he'd teach me to ride his horse, Thunder, and he fixed my toy soldier that was broken. The judge asked similar questions of Clara and even little Lily, listening carefully to each answer. Finally, he straightened up and faced the congregation again. I have heard testimony from the alleged victim, who feels no harm was done. I have heard from the accused, who admits her actions, but explains her desperate circumstances. I have spoken with the children involved, who clearly benefit from their current living situation. He paused dramatically. Most importantly, I have observed a community that stands ready to condemn a struggling mother while ignoring their own failure to offer Christian charity when it was desperately needed. Martha held her breath, afraid to hope, afraid to despair. Therefore, Judge Crawford continued, I find no grounds for criminal charges in this matter. Mr. Morrison clearly suffered no harm and wishes no prosecution. The children are obviously well cared for and happy. And if this community had any sense at all, they would be celebrating the fact that 2 good people have found each other and are creating a loving home for 5 children who have already suffered too much loss. A cheer went up from Martha's supporters, while Mr. Blackwood's face turned an alarming shade of purple. But, Your Honor, he sputtered, the irregular living arrangements are about to become completely regular. Judge Crawford cut him off. Reverend Patterson, I believe you have a wedding to perform, and I have the authority to make it legal right here and now. He turned to Martha and Ezra with something that might have been a smile lurking in his stern eyes. That is, if the bride and groom are still willing. Martha looked at Ezra and saw her own joy reflected in his face. Around them, her children bounced with excitement, and their friends in the congregation beamed with happiness. We're willing, Martha said, her voice strong and clear. Then let's have a wedding, Judge Crawford declared. And Mr. Blackwood, you and your Marshall friend can see yourselves out. This is a celebration, not a trial. As the troublemakers filed out of the church with sullen faces, Martha felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she'd been carrying for months. Not just the fear of arrest or separation from her children, but the deeper burden of shame and worthlessness that had haunted her since James died. She wasn't a criminal. She wasn't a failure. She was a mother who had fought for her children and a woman who deserved happiness. And in 5 minutes, she was going to marry the man who had seen all of that from the very beginning. Reverend Patterson cleared his throat nervously. "Well then," he said, "shall we begin?" Martha took Ezra's offered arm and walked with him to the altar, her children gathering around them like flowers around a tree. Through the church windows, she could see storm clouds building on the horizon, promising the rain that would turn the desert green. It seemed like the perfect time for new beginnings. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Judge Crawford's words echoed through the small church like bells ringing out across the desert. Martha felt Ezra's warm hand squeeze hers as they stood before the altar, surrounded by their children and the few friends brave enough to stay for the ceremony. Outside, the storm clouds had grown darker, and the first drops of rain began pattering against the windows. "You may kiss your bride," the judge said with what might have been the first genuine smile Martha had ever seen on his stern face. Ezra turned to her, his gray eyes soft with emotion. "Mrs. Morrison," he said quietly, and the sound of her new name made Martha's heart skip like a stone across water. The kiss was gentle, respectful, and full of promise for the future they would build together. When they broke apart, Martha could hear her children cheering from the front pew, their voices bright with joy and relief. "Mama's married," little Lily announced to everyone, clapping her small hands together. "We're Morrisons now," Benjamin added, practically bouncing with excitement. Emma stepped forward, carrying a small bouquet of desert wildflowers she'd picked that morning. "These are for you, Mama," she said, her voice thick with happy tears. "From all of us." Martha took the flowers with shaking hands, breathing in their sweet scent. "Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you all." Mrs. Henderson stood up in the third row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Well, I think this calls for a celebration. I've got a cake waiting back at the store, and fresh bread too. And I have some of my wife's good tamales," old Mr. Garcia added. "We feast today." As the small wedding party began filing out of the church, chattering excitedly about the impromptu reception, Martha lingered for a moment at the altar. Everything had happened so fast, from desperate robbery attempt to wedding ceremony in just 3 weeks. It felt like a dream, too good to be real. "Having second thoughts?" Ezra asked softly, appearing at her side. "Just wondering if I'm going to wake up and find out none of this really happened," Martha admitted. Ezra took her hand and placed it over his heart, where she could feel the steady, strong beat beneath his vest. "It's real," he said. "We're real. This family we're building together. It's all real." Thunder rumbled outside, and the rain began falling harder. Through the windows, Martha could see people hurrying along the main street, pulling their coats over their heads. But here in the church, she felt warm and safe, and completely at peace for the first time in months. "Mr. Morrison," she said, testing out the sound of his name on her lips, "what do you think our life is going to be like?" "I think," Ezra said, smiling down at her, "it's going to be messy and loud and busy and wonderful. 5 children don't exactly make for a quiet household." 6. Martha corrected without thinking, then felt her cheeks burn as she realized what she'd said. Ezra's eyes widened. 6? Martha nodded, placing her free hand on her still flat stomach. "I've suspected for about a week now. I was going to tell you after. Well, after we figured out whether we were all going to jail or not." The look of wonder that spread across Ezra's face was like watching the sun rise over the mountains. "A baby?" he whispered. "Our baby," Martha confirmed, and felt tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. Ezra swept her into his arms, spinning her around in a circle right there in front of the altar. When he set her down, they were both laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby Morrison," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "I can't. I never thought." "Are you happy about it?" Martha asked, suddenly worried. They'd never talked about having children together, and he'd already taken on 5 that weren't his own blood. "Happy?" Ezra cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "Martha, I'm over the moon. I'm walking on air. I'm the luckiest man in the whole territory." From the doorway of the church, Emma's voice called out, "Mama, Papa Ezra, come on. It's raining cats and dogs out here, and we're all getting soaked." Papa Ezra. Martha felt her heart swell even bigger at the sound of her daughter calling him that. They really were a family now, complete and whole, and ready to face whatever came next. "We better go," she said, taking Ezra's offered arm. "Our children are waiting." As they walked toward the door, Martha caught sight of their reflection in one of the church windows. A man and woman in their wedding clothes, surrounded by 5 excited children, all of them sheltered from the storm outside. It was exactly the life she'd stopped believing was possible. The future stretched ahead of them like an unwritten book, and Martha Morrison was ready to help write every page. 6 months after their wedding, Martha Morrison stood in the doorway of their expanded ranch house, watching her husband teach their youngest son how to milk their new cow. The morning sun painted everything golden. The desert landscape that had seemed so harsh and unforgiving when she first arrived. The wooden fence Ezra and Benjamin had built together. The vegetable garden where Emma and Clara spent their afternoons. Even baby Michael, now almost 2 and toddling around the yard on unsteady legs, seemed to glow in the warm light. "Higher, Papa," 6-year-old Lily called from where she sat perched on Ezra's shoulders, helping him hang laundry on the line. The little girl who used to hide behind water barrels now chattered constantly, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and wanted. Martha's hand moved instinctively to her rounded belly, where their new baby grew stronger every day. The morning sickness had passed, and now she felt nothing but excitement for the child who would be born into this loving, chaotic, wonderful family they'd created together. "Mrs. Morrison?" A familiar voice called from the front of the house. Martha turned to see Mrs. Patterson, the preacher's wife, walking up the dusty path with a covered basket in her arms. Over the past few months, the woman had become a genuine friend, often stopping by with fresh bread or offers to help with the children. "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson," Martha called back, wiping her floury hands on her apron. "What brings you out so early?" "I have news," the older woman said, slightly out of breath from her walk. "The territorial governor has approved funding for a new school here in Tucson. They're looking for a teacher, someone with experience managing children and a good head for learning." Martha felt her pulse quicken. "A teacher? The pay isn't much," Mrs. Patterson continued, "but it would be steady work, and you could bring baby Michael with you if needed. The school board met last night, and your name came up more than once." "My name?" Martha couldn't hide her surprise. "But I'm not formally educated. I only finished 8th grade before I got married." "You taught your children to read and write and do sums while you were struggling to keep them fed," Mrs. Patterson pointed out. "You've been helping other families in town with their children's lessons. Mrs. Henderson says you explained fractions to her grandson better than anyone ever had. That sounds like a teacher to me." Through the window, Martha could see Ezra walking toward the house with little Lily still on his shoulders. Benjamin ran alongside them, chattering excitedly about something they'd seen near the creek. The sight filled her with such contentment that for a moment she couldn't imagine wanting anything more than this peaceful ranch life. But then she thought about the children in town who might not have anyone to teach them. Kids like hers had been overlooked, forgotten, left behind by a world that didn't have time for poor families or complicated situations. When would they need an answer? Martha asked. By next week. Classes would start in the fall once they finished building the schoolhouse. Ezra appeared in the doorway, setting Lily down gently before greeting Mrs. Patterson with a tip of his hat. "Morning, ma'am. Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Indeed it is, Mr. Morrison. I was just telling your wife about the teaching position that's opened up." Ezra's eyebrows rose with interest. "Teaching? That sounds perfect for Martha." "You think so?" Martha asked, touched by his immediate support but worried about the practical aspects. "It would mean being away from home during school hours, and with the new baby coming." "Martha Morrison," Ezra said, taking her hands in his calloused ones, "you've got more wisdom and patience than any 3 teachers put together. Those children would be lucky to have you." Emma appeared at Martha's elbow, having overheard the conversation. "Mama, you should do it. Remember how you helped me learn to read when I was little? You made it fun, like a game. And you helped Benjamin with his numbers," Clara added, joining the growing group on the porch. Martha looked around at her family, her husband who believed in her completely, her children who thought she could do anything, her friend who'd walked all this way just to offer her an opportunity. 6 months ago, she'd been a desperate woman with a gun, convinced she was worthless except as a mother and caretaker. Now she was being offered the chance to shape young minds, to help other children learn and grow and discover their own potential. Yes, she said suddenly, the word coming out strong and clear. Yes, I'd like to try. Mrs. Patterson beamed. Wonderful. I'll let the school board know this afternoon. As their friend headed back toward town with the good news, Martha leaned against the porch railing and watched her children play in the yard. Benjamin was showing Michael how to stack blocks, his patience gentle and sure. The girls were braiding wildflowers into crowns, their laughter bright as birdsong. Penny for your thoughts, Ezra said, settling beside her. I was just thinking about names, Martha replied, her hand moving to her belly again. For the baby? No, for me. For months, I defined myself by what I'd lost. I was James's widow, a woman without a husband. Then I was a desperate mother, someone who'd do anything to feed her children. After that, I was a scandal, a woman living improperly. She turned to look at Ezra, seeing love and understanding in his gray eyes. But that's not who I am, is it? I'm Martha Morrison. I'm a wife, a mother, and soon I'll be a teacher. I'm someone who fights for what matters, who loves fiercely, who doesn't give up even when things seem impossible. You're the strongest person I know, Ezra said softly, and the kindest, and definitely the most beautiful. Martha laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. Even with flour in my hair and a baby making me waddle like a duck. Especially then, the sun climbed higher, promising another warm Arizona day. In a few hours, there would be lessons to teach, meals to cook, children to tend, and a ranch to run. The future held challenges she couldn't even imagine yet. A new baby to raise, a classroom full of students to guide, a growing family to nurture. But Martha Morrison was ready for all of it. She'd learned that worth wasn't something other people gave you or took away. It came from within, from the choices you made and the love you shared and the courage you found when everything seemed lost. She'd pointed a gun at a stranger 6 months ago, desperate and afraid and convinced she had no other options. That stranger had become her husband, her children's father, her partner in building a life none of them could have imagined. Sometimes, Martha thought as she watched her family in the golden morning light, the most unexpected encounters led to the most extraordinary blessings. And the name that mattered most wasn't the one society tried to give you, but the one you claimed for yourself.